Good afternoon. Welcome to the kickoff event for the Real College Virtual Journey. I'm Deirdre Childress Hopkins, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice in the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple University. You're in for a packed program with us this afternoon as we take a look at our most recent Real College National Report, followed by our panel discussion. This is our sixth survey of college students and our largest ever, touching nearly 200,000 students. So I know this is going to be an amazing afternoon. I just want to remind everyone that today's program is in two parts and that we will have a second section after a short comfort break in the middle. We're live streaming the event, but when we're done, the presentation will continue live at the link you used today. Feel free to share today's program with others you think would love to learn more about the Real College Virtual Journey. I would like to introduce you to Christine Baker-Smith, Executive Director of the Hope Center, and Frederick Shegog, a Real College Student Leadership Advisory Council member, who will discuss the newly released Real College National Report. Before joining the Hope Center, Christy was a lecturer in research methodology for the quantitative methods in the social sciences at Columbia University. She was an education policy analyst for the New York City Independent Budget Office. She holds a PhD from New York University, and she has a master's in social science from Whitman College. Freddie is an undergraduate at Westchester University in Pennsylvania. He brings the student leadership perspective to today's discussion. With that, I'll turn you over to Christy Baker-Smith.
Thanks so much, Deirdre. All right, so I am so pleased to welcome you all to the inaugural voyage of our Real College Virtual Journey. And I want to begin by flagging that we are talking this year in our national report about student experiences during the pandemic. This is unusual for us. Usually we're just talking about student experiences throughout the year. This time, we're going to have a pretty unique view of what's going on for students. Next slide, please. We're going to start with a student voice from Arkansas. She says, "It's very difficult to be able to focus on college and academics. The stress and anxiety of our nation and the world's future is hard enough. When you add financial uncertainty and uncertainty of our day-to-day life, it's almost overwhelming." Next slide. So what does she mean when she talks about financial uncertainty? She's a student. She should have her tuition paid for. She should have student loans. Her parents are taking care of her. That's what college looked like 50 years ago. Today, we're talking about the new economics of college, in which financial uncertainty is a strong reality. Let's start with the fact that historically, colleges and universities were strongly supported by federal and state governments, and they passed those supports on to their students. Those supports were passed on in terms of discounted tuition for public institutions. Those supports were passed on in terms of full-time staff and faculty who could give students full-time support, and support offices like financial services and student services and medical offices where students could access supports full-time. In the last 20 years, we have had multiple recessions, and funding policies have changed such that public institutions of higher education are no longer strongly supported by our government. And what this means is that the burden of price now falls squarely on the shoulders of our students. What does that mean for students in an era where we are having declining growth economically? In addition to growing inequality with regard to wealth and socioeconomic status? Well, traditionally, historically, when individuals in the United States are struggling financially, they turn to our social safety net. That safety net includes things like food stamps, which we now call SNAP. TANF, which used to be called welfare, tax credits, dependent care and child care supports, medical support. However, all of those programs have eligibility requirements. And one of the key problems today for students is that many of those requirements reduce us or eliminate a student's eligibility for those services. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us with students working to shoulder that burden of price. And unfortunately, students enter into this work world with limited opportunities. For starters, they don't have a college degree, that very thing that they are fighting for. They don't enter the work world with that degree at this time. Additionally, they need supports in terms of flexible work hours in order to accommodate their changing class schedule every term, in addition to the other demands on them. And employers don't love to provide that kind of flexibility. That's hard on the employer. It's difficult for maintaining continuity in an employment force. And therefore, we end up with students who are working multiple jobs in college, most often for minimum wage. And these are not the 10 hours a week shelving books in my campus library kind of job. These are the working the night shift in a loading plant for Amazon. These are working at the grocery store and then driving to go do a shift at Wendy's in between your classes. And all of these factors take a toll on our students and contribute to a growing cause of concern for our country and for practitioners and those who are engaged in higher education, which is a concern about our students' health and well-being, which we all know is an academic issue because we can't expect them to succeed academically when they're not being taken care of in other ways and don't have opportunities to care for themselves in those ways. Next slide, please. COVID had an additional impact on these interrelated issues. For starters, enrollment declined substantially across the country this fall. What that means for institutions is that they had fewer dollars to use to support students. There were layoffs. There were limited dollars for student supports, partly because of those layoffs and also in addition. And then we were fortunate, and at the end of 2020, there was $6 billion allocated to institutions of higher ed through the CARES Act. That's huge. But now we have that money to support students. And we've got institutions that are struggling because they don't have all the staff they had, let alone the infrastructure to distribute those dollars. And so it remains to be seen how useful and effective those dollars are or have been or will be for students as we move forward. Next slide. COVID didn't only have an impact on our institutions, it hit our students too. 40% of our students had a close friend or loved one who got COVID. 7% of them were sick themselves. And 13% of the students that spoke to us this year had lost a loved one due to COVID. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is about disproportionality and where students are disproportionately impacted by things due to who they are. This is the first time you're going to see this in today's presentation. Latinx students were more than twice as likely as their white peers to lose a loved one due to COVID. Next slide. This isn't the only place where students were impacted by the pandemic. Almost 3/4 of students said they had trouble concentrating in class. 35% exhibited at least moderate anxiety. Over 1/3 lost their job. And again, we see, depending on who you were, that was more or less likely, with Middle Eastern students being the most likely to lose work this year. And 40% of our students were taking care of family members while attending class. Next slide, please. So how do we know this? And what else can we tell you? We spoke with over 200,000 students. And we spoke to them through, or heard from them through, an electronic survey. So we sent this survey out to over 2 million students. We got 200,000 responses from 42 states, 132 two-year colleges, 72 four-years, 14 HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and 5 tribal colleges. These students spoke to us. They spoke to us between September and November of last year. So they were still enrolled in college after the spring. These are the students that came back, not the students that were part of the enrollment decline in the fall. And one of the questions we always get is, well, you said you sent that survey to 2 million people, but only 200,000 responded. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to ask you to take a step back and think about how many emails you got today. How many emails did you get from your employer? How many of those have you opened? And how many of those that you opened have you had a chance to actually deal with? Now imagine you're a student in fall 2020 and think about how many emails you're getting from your college in a day. And think about all the other things going on in your life. And think about how likely you are to click on a link to answer a survey. Okay, so that's our 200,000 students, the ones that actually click that link. Now I want you to think about who's not clicking that link. Imagine that you're a student who is working 2 jobs, attending class full-time, and you have 2 kids at home who just got pulled out of physical school and are now homeschooling because of COVID. Do you really have time to deal with those emails that aren't absolute emergencies? Let's say you lost your job and you're struggling to pay rent and you definitely don't have money for your internet bill. And you've driven to Safeway or to Starbucks to sit in your car to get their hotspot so that you can attend class. And then you've got to get home to make dinner. Do you really think you're going to take that class time to finish a survey? I don't think so. All of that is to say, we think the numbers we're showing you today are an underestimate. The very students who are most impacted by basic needs insecurity are the ones who are the least likely to respond to our survey. And some of these numbers are surprising and staggering. Remember, they are most likely an underestimate. Next slide, please. So here are the numbers. We're going to talk a lot about basic needs insecurity. When I talk about basic needs insecurity, what I'm saying is the student was food insecure, housing insecure, or homeless. There are a number of other types of basic needs that we'd like to talk about more, but for simplicity today, we're going to talk about those. We're going to save things like transportation, mental health, access to healthcare, access to dependent care for another time. So what we're seeing here is 50 to 60% of our students today, students in fall 2020, said they were experiencing some type of basic needs insecurity. They were food insecure, housing insecure, or homeless. 30 to 40% said they were food insecure. What does this mean? It means I skipped a meal because I didn't have money. It means I bought ramen because I couldn't afford a healthier alternative. Not because I wanted ramen, because it was what I could afford. It means I skipped meals so that my kids had food. It means I skipped meals because I was worried about money running out. 30 to 40% of our students are saying that. 40 to 50% of our students are talking about being housing insecure. This means I'm facing eviction. I wasn't able to pay my utility bill. I am about to or just did miss a rent payment. These are things that put you on the brink of homelessness. They are not homelessness, but they are right there. And imagine focusing in class when you know that your internet's about to go out, or your heat in the middle of the winter, or you're one thing away from losing your house or your apartment. And then there are the students who have lost it. 14% of our students are homeless in fall 2020. And this doesn't just mean being on the street. This could be sleeping in a tent. This could be staying on a relative's couch because your home is unsafe. This could mean spending couch surfing, going from relative to relative because you got evicted because a month ago you were housing insecure. Next slide, please. All right. So one of the things you probably saw on the last slide is that the 2-year rates for basic needs insecurity are generally higher than the 4-year rates. There are lots of reasons for this that start with who the students are and where they're coming from, to how well they are supported by their institutions. There's an 8% gap in basic needs insecurity. One of the important things we see this year that we've never seen before is that homelessness is the same at 2- and 4-year institutions. We suspect this has something to do with the transitions onto and off of campus that 4-year institutions experienced in fall 2020. Also, you'll see on this slide, when we talk about disparities, the Black-white gap in basic needs insecurity is 16 percentage points. Black students are experiencing basic needs insecurity 16 percentage points higher than their white peers. And the same is true for parenting students as compared to their non-parenting peers. Next slide, please. So what do we do? How do we do this? So if our institutions of higher education are willing to identify basic needs insecurity as an academic issue and collect and use data on basic needs insecurity assessments to understand real time what's going on their campus, then they can create an ecosystem of support, teach with a pedagogy of care, design support services for students as humans, and thereby also change state and federal policy. With this approach, we can create opportunities for student engagement and success. Next slide. So some of the things that colleges are doing to address students' basic needs, this is the creating an ecosystem of support and treating students as humans, is offering emergency aid. You can see that 1/3 of students this year applied for and received emergency aid. But I direct your eyes to the 18% received SNAP and remind you that our food insecurity rate was 30 to 40%. So why isn't this graph showing you that 34 to 40% of our students receive SNAP? They should be. And one of the answers why is that half of our students say they didn't apply for supports because they didn't know how. It's that simple. Next slide. And yet, when students get these supports, our students told us this year, 76% of those that got emergency aid said it reduced their stress. 73% said they used it to afford educational materials like books and supplies. 70% of them said it helped them stay enrolled. And if this doesn't tell us that addressing basic needs is an academic issue, I don't know what does. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to close with some words from one of our students in Texas. And he says, college students need money and should be included in any stimulus bill or federal program to aid people financially at this time. It is ridiculously challenging to work, to study, to take care of my family and exist, all while there is a pandemic that is negatively affecting our ability to function. Next slide. Before we go any further, I want to thank the numerous sponsors that we have had for both the work to capture student voice and to understand what our students are experiencing this year, and especially to thank Course Hero, who has generously offered to support the Real College virtual journey, where we are starting out today. And with that, I'm going to hand off to Freddie. Next slide.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, let me be very clear that I am humbled, grateful, and blessed to have this platform to share my truth. I want to thank everybody, all the presenters before me and all the presenters after me, for your hard and tireless efforts of work, and it's an honor to be here with you. Also, thank you to everybody who has shown up. We appreciate your time, and we thank you for being here with us, because without you, we can't take this data and make the improvements we need to serve the students that need these services. Whew. It's been a journey, but it's been a good one, and I've learned a lot. So let me explain to you my real college journey. But to understand that I'm a real college student, you must understand how I got here. So let's back up and start at the beginning. Almost 5 years ago, I was downtown, dumpster diving, panhandling, begging for change, drug and alcohol addicted. My life was a should have been, could have been. Luckily, a man stepped into my life, was an angel, African-American brother. I don't know his name. I wish I did. I owe him a dinner. He stepped in and I said, let me die. And he said, no, you ain't dying today. He handed me a pillow and a glass of water. And he said, I called the ambulance. They're on their way. He saved my life. That allowed me to go to treatment. And when I went to treatment, I took a year to get mentally, spiritually, and physically correct before I would enter college. When I walked on college campus, I entered as a student in recovery, a student that receives SNAP, a student that takes the bus, a student that needs certain critical resources. And that's what this data has shown us today. See, the great thing about this data is that it's no longer a conversation of we think or we hope or we've heard. The data is hard evidence to prove that the resources are needed. One of the greatest things about education that we know is that education teaches us about behavior, and it shows us statistics of things that are needed. The greatest gift of knowledge is sharing it. And that's one of the things that this data does. It allows us to all look at this and say, how can I tap into my resources, my networks, and how can I use this to help those that need? Because one thing we all must remember, we've all gotten support to get where we got. So in order for other students to get there, they need these certain resources that can help them achieve their dreams as well. All right, so I arrive on campus, and true to form my addictive mind, I arrive on campus. Listen, I'm a diehard Green Bay fan. I got Green Bay phone, I got Green Bay hat, I got all this stuff. I'm on campus. My name's Freddie. I'm so happy to be here. I'm telling everybody I take mental health meds, right? I'm thrilled to be here. And one of the reasons is when I walked into the building, I didn't walk in searching for grades. I walked in searching for life. See, I'm the type of student where the way that you educate me is by understanding I'm human first. You know, we use these big words in academia, this academia jargon that most students don't know. And Christine had talked about it, right? Pedagogy, and, you know, we use these things, retention and you know, all these different words in feeder institutions. All that jargon means be kind. Understand that every student is not coming from a home of updated scholarship, eating elderberry to treat their immune system, reading and traveling and having all those things. Some students are at home and they're trying to figure out water and lights. Some students are at home and they're trying to figure out, how am I going to get through the day? Not this APA paper. And the best professors and educators are the ones that understand that. And that's why, taking this data that you've seen, we have the opportunity to not only educate, but we can educate while providing them with the support they need. One of the things I've learned in education, I used to think I wasn't as smart. I used to think I didn't matter. What I realized is, it's not that I'm not as smart. What I realized is that I'm not as supported. The way that I can achieve, the way that I can do things is by giving resources and networks to achieve my dreams as well. So my first day on campus, if you know anything about education, which most everybody does, they send you to take placement test in community college. So I go take my placement test. And she comes back, she says, "Congratulations, sir. You placed in the remedial level." I was like, yes, because I didn't know what remedial meant. I thought it meant advanced courses. So I'm all happy. I'm walking around, "Hey, y'all, I tested in the remedial course. I'll see y'all there," right? I had no idea what I was doing. So when I find out it's a remedial course, I come home and tell my wife, and I'm sad. And my wife says to me, "Freddie, just go to class." So I arrive on campus, English 025. Now I'm about to take you through a tutorial on how you educate and help a real college student and how you bring the best out of them. I get in this class, and the English 025 teacher says to me, "I'm going to give you an assignment on identity. Now, I'm not going to grade this on grammar. I'm going to grade it on content." And I raised my hand. I said, "Are you sure? Because I got a story to tell you." She said, "Yeah, Freddie, I'm sure. Please tell me." So I wrote in there about how I was dumpster diving. I wrote in there about how the things I went through with my mental health and my substance abuse. Now, mind you, I didn't see the climate of that on the campus. And I was very nervous to write that. And as a real college student, you can be embarrassed to say, "I'm hungry." You can be embarrassed to say those type of things. Because honestly, it's hard to talk about that if you don't feel that that love's going to come back because you put yourself out there. Well, I put myself out there and I told her. After class, she says to me, "Freddie, there's life in this paper. We're going to get you published." And I looked at her, I said, "What's published?" I had no idea, never knew what it meant, right? She shares with me a conference and a resource. I go to this conference. I meet with somebody that knows the editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer. They asked me, "Dude, I want to tell my story." I said, "Yes, and we lead collegiate recovery on my campus." She said, "Great." She said, "I'll tell you what, send it to me." Don't you know that by her treating me as a human first, it allowed me to be published on the front page of the op-ed section of the Philadelphia Inquirer? Now think about this. A student who's received SNAP, a student that needs mental health services, a student that needs collegiate recovery services, because your educator stepped in, saw what I needed, saw that I was a real college student, they took their resources, showed them to me, showed me the process of how to walk through that, and it now put me in a position where I have a motivational speaking company and I have a presence on campus where other people want to talk to me. Now, here's my question to you today. How can you take this data and find your Freddie on campus? How can you take this data and find your student on campus who has talents and gifts as well? Because I'm not the only student with talent and gifts. I just happen to be one of the students that was lucky and blessed enough to know the president, to know the marketing department, where they molded me into a professional and taught me the ropes. And one of the ways they did that was they brought me into the meetings. And they said things like, and this is another tutorial on how you help. "Hey, this real college student right here, we want to take him under our wing. And we want to give him a village of power where he can tap into us and he can tap into the things that he needs." And they would say things in a meeting like, "Well, what about what Freddie thought? Well, what about what Freddie said? Did you hear Freddie's opinion?" See, while they were walking me through this, my self-esteem was building. I started to believe in myself. I started to realize that this campus does care about mental health. This campus does care about collegiate recovery. Hey, when I walk in this class and I got to catch the bus, and if I'm late, that teacher will understand. That teacher will understand that tonight I might have to save my money because I might not got enough money to eat. You know, Christine talked about it. We need to understand that if you have a student in your class and maybe he doesn't look like he's paying attention, or maybe he's sleepy, or maybe something's going on, Maybe it's because he's been up all night because he got to take care of both his brother and sister. Maybe it's because of the fact that he was waiting at the bus stop for hours and he's cold. Maybe it's because of the fact that he don't have what you have. And we need to understand that. We're not sharing this data to say, look at the problem. We're sharing this data to ask you to help us solve the problem. One of the greatest things about education that I learned, W.E.B.D. Du Bois was right. Education is not supposed to just teach work. Education is supposed to teach life. That's the greatest gift about this, is that we now have data we've never seen before. We now have things that we understand, and we all have the power. That doctorate that you're blessed to have, that master's that you're blessed to have, that institution that you're blessed to be on, that nonprofit board that you're blessed to be on, that is for you to help serve other people that don't got what you got. One of the reasons I'm thankful to be a part of this is because now I feel like my voice matters. Now I feel like they care about me. And let me tell you how the journey kept going. So I get published in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And when I get published in that Inquirer, I get a call from New Jersey, Cambria County Technical Schools. They said, Frederick, we like your story. We'd like you to speak. I said, me? They said, yeah, we'll pay you. I said, what? I said, yeah, I'll come down there. I'm a real college student. I'm going to come tell you my story. I couldn't wait. I was so happy. Then the marketing department and the president surrounded me and they emboldened me. And what they did was they gave me a presence on campus. Let me tell you how that's worked out for me. By them doing that, it's allowed me to graduate Delaware County Community College with a 3.74 GPA. I graduated with that GPA and I was selected as an all-state, all-PA academic team, which allowed me to get a full ride to Westchester University. I was selected in the Honors College at Westchester University. By being selected in there, I have now 18 credits. I have a 3.73 GPA. I'm a student that goes to the Office of Disabilities. They understand the resources I need, and they make sure that I'm connected and I'm tapped into where I need to be at. Do you know what it feels like for a student that came on campus at 30-some years old, that didn't have no other passport, that didn't have no other way? Education was all I had, and hadn't people took the time, hadn't people sat down and said, you know what? You might not got what them other students got, but we're going to meet you where you're at, and we're going to help point you to the resource you need to. And if you can't find them, when you get done, come back and see me, because then I'm going to show you to my other person. See, when we're in these meetings and we're allocating funding, we need to make sure that the football life, the Greek life, we need to make sure that the health department, the communications department, that all those departments are funded equally, because each student that is involved with those departments are equal students. The best way that you deal with students is that you take this data, you sit on it, and you get to work. Because the reality of it is, the longer we wait, the longer we choose not to do anything, the longer somebody might starve. The longer somebody might not be able to do the things that we want to do. So I want to end you with this, and I want to take you on this last ride to show you where things are at today. As I said, I'm at Westchester University, thankfully, great university. I was just accepted into the accelerated bachelor's to master's program. What that means is that next fall, I'm enrolled into my graduate program of study. I will graduate in May with 6 grad courses under my belt. I am now applying for an assistantship at the Frederick Douglass Institute, grad assistantship. I also have a motivational speaking company where they allow me to go to other campuses and advocate. And you know why I do that? Because other people advocated for me. So what that taught me was, it's my job to empower people to empower other people. See, that's the great thing about helping a real college student. We're seasoned souls. See, we understand what it's like not to have dinner. We understand what it's like to come to college and not feel that you're worthy. And by somebody helping me, it's putting me to make sure I help. So I'm a student, I'm running a speaking company, and I write. And I'm thankful to let you know that I learned a valuable lesson about college, one that I will take to me forever. College should not just change my bank account. College should change my soul. Thank you all for listening to me and allowing me to share my truth. And God bless you, and thank you for being here. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Freddie. So we have a couple of minutes here, and I have a couple of follow-up questions for Freddie.
Yes.
So Freddie, I'm going to take your last words there.
Mm-hmm.
college shouldn't just change your bank account.
Mhm.
But you started college when you were in your 30s.
Yes.
You had a whole lot of other stuff going on.
Yes.
Why bother? Why? It's a long road, especially if you can't go full time, especially when you've got all this other stuff going on.
Right.
What is it that made you say it's still worth it? Even now, I'm not 18, but I'm still going to do this.
Because I believe that college should give me a passport to a new life. I believe that education was a way for me to be able to use the gifts and talents I have. I truly believe that. I truly believe that education was fairness and equality. And I believe that if I was to tap into education, there would be people there that understood me, that have come from my walk and were willing to help me. That's why I believed education could help me have a new life.
Awesome. Deirdre, I'm going to hand off to you.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Christy, Freddie, what an excellent job of explaining our data. Freddie, you shared so many things. There's points that we're all writing in our notebook saying, oh my, that's why we're doing this work. That was amazing. It's so great to work with you as a member of our Real College Student Leadership Advisory Council. The whole group is helping us to ensure that students have a seat at the table for all of the Real College movement work that we're doing at the Hope Center. So this is just a wonderful presentation, and I really am grateful that you shared this with everybody who's watching this afternoon. At this time, we're going to, oh, you're amazing. At this time, we're going to take a quick break, a little comfort break. So fill your water cups, do a quick stretch, and then we'll be right back here at 4 p.m. for the second half of our panel discussion. Don't go away. Don't go too far. It's going to be amazing. We'll have Soledad O'Brien, Wes Moore, and our phenomenal president and founder, Sarah Goldrick-Robb. We'll be coming right back at you at 4 p.m. Thank you. Welcome back. We're going to be able to start the second half of our program a little bit early. All of our speakers are in place, so if you just sit tight for about 2 to 3 more minutes, we're going to restart the second half of our program. So come on back to your seats. We're gonna get started a little early. There's a lot to discuss in our last report, and I think you're gonna find it enjoyable, and you will be getting a lot of new information. We'll be bringing up our founder and president, Sarah Goldrick Robb, Wes Moore, a great social entrepreneur, and documentarian Soledad O'Brien in just a few moments. Thank you for staying with us this afternoon for this important conversation. Welcome back. We're now ready to start the second half of our kickoff event. I want to invite everyone to sign up for the virtual journey on our website. If you're enjoying today's exceptional program, we have 9 months of the virtual journey ahead for you with more information, more research, and more discussion with colleagues. At this time, I would like to introduce Sarah Goldrick-Robb. Sarah is professor of sociology and medicine at Temple University. She's our president and founder of the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice. Her research for college students' basic needs sparked the Real College movement just over 5 years ago. It also prompted legislation to address food and housing insecurity. Sarah is a Carnegie Fellow, and in 2016, Politico magazine named her as one of the top 50 people shaping American politics. Her book, Paying the Price, College Costs, Financial Aid, and the Betrayal of the American Dream, was featured on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and she received the $100,000 Grawemeyer Prize, which she donated to Student Emergency Aid. She's also in the top influencers in this country in terms of education policy. With that, I'm going to turn over the rest of the Hope Center's wonderful afternoon to our president and our founder, Sarah Goldrick-Robb.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, and thanks to my entire team at the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice for all of your incredibly hard work putting together this report and this afternoon's event. And before I get started in a conversation with two people I am so honored to call friends, Soledad O'Brien and Wes Moore, I want to say a few more words of thanks, and then I want to have a moment to honor someone that our team recently lost. Our team at the Hope Center has grown leaps and bounds over the last year. We were only about a dozen people when the pandemic struck, and today we are more than 30 strong. I'm told by our Senior Director of Operations and Finance, Dr. Idrissa Hamid, that we will soon be hiring another 15 teammates. It's incredible. And it really is a testament to the extent to which students' basic needs are being taken seriously and the need for institutions and policymakers to have support so that they can improve their practice. I want to urge all of you to keep an eye on our website where we post options for working with us in either an employment capacity or a volunteer capacity and so forth on a regular basis, and want to invite you to consider becoming part of our fast-growing team, whether that's here in Philadelphia or around the country. I also want to thank my dear friend and incredible colleague, Christy Baker-Smith, for kicking off today's event. And I want to also thank Freddie Shagag, who I was honored to have an opportunity to share the stage with at Delaware County Community College several years ago. And I've gotten to watch him blossom as a member of the Student Leadership Advisory Council, which is directed by Tyler Lum. We have done a lot of work to put together that report that you saw here today, and it has engaged all of our teams, our research team, our institutional transformation team, policy and advocacy, sustainability, so many people doing so much hard work. And together with Swaim Strategies, we've also been honored to be able to launch the Real College Virtual Journey. And I want to acknowledge all the daily hard work that has gone into this effort. Now, unfortunately, on Friday, we took a major loss. The dean of the Lewis Katz School of Medicine here at Temple University, Dr. John Daly, passed away. Some of you may know that when we first came to Temple University, we were in a different location. And over this past year, during the pandemic, John and his team welcomed us into a new home at Temple, the School of Medicine. It is perhaps a bit unusual for an education research focused team to join a School of Medicine, but John did not treat it as unusual. He welcomed us. And I think that's because John truly recognizes that students are humans first. His legacy is going to live on with that recognition. When we joined, he made sure to ask us what we needed. He met those needs. And He welcomed us in ways that I personally, in 20 years of working in higher education, often just don't find to be all that common. He served as Dean of the School of Medicine for more than a decade. He actually just became our Dean again after handling an interim position for more than a year. He fought for the recognition and addressing of real college issues at every level, including among medical students. And he leaves a lot of us truly missing him throughout the Hope Center, throughout the School of Medicine, throughout Temple University, throughout Philadelphia, and throughout the nation. If you take a look at our report, you'll see that we dedicated this report to John, and we are really going to miss him dearly. Now, before we get started, there's only one other thing that I want to announce. We have decided this fall to suspend the regular Real College survey implementation. We will resume next fall in 2022. Instead, we're going to invest our time and energy in a new initiative. You can put up the slide for me. It's called the Institutional Capacity Building Cohort, or ICBC. This is an opportunity for up to 40 colleges and universities from around the country to apply to become part of a learning cohort that will work closely with our team to transform their practice over the next academic year. We have obtained some financial support that makes it possible for us to provide a limited number of scholarships for this effort. But in addition, you can probably fund your institution's participation using some of the most recent federal stimulus dollars, which are intended to help you improve supports for your students' basic needs. As of today, the application process for the ICBC has begun. You can find it on our website, and I urge you to consider applying. You need to assemble a team and prepare to spend the year working with us as we coach you on evidence-based practices, how to assess your own students' needs, and how to fight for the policy changes that address the challenges that Freddie and Christy raised today. So I do encourage you to take a look. That is now on the front page of our website at hopeforcollege.com. Now, let's get to the fun part. I'm so pleased to introduce two of my friends and colleagues. First, I want to welcome Wes Moore, who is currently Chief Executive Officer of Robinhood, one of the largest anti-poverty forces in the nation. He is so many things. He is a best-selling author. He's a combat veteran. He's a social entrepreneur. He wrote an amazing book that I hope you'll read called The Other Wes Moore, which is a New York Times bestseller and captured the fine line between success and failure in our communities and in ourselves. That story has been optioned by none other than Oprah Winfrey and HBO to be made into a movie. He's also the author of many other best-selling books, and I want to especially recommend his amazing book with Erica Green called 5 Days. He grew up in Baltimore and the Bronx, where he was raised by a single mom. He went on to do so many other things, including earning a degree in international relations from Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. He served as a White House fellow to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and before becoming CEO at Robinhood, he founded and was CEO at Bridge EDU, an education platform based in Baltimore, addressing the college completion and job placement crisis by reinventing the first year of college for underserved students. I'm lucky that that is when and where we met. Most recently, Bridge EDU was acquired by Edquity, which is the emergency aid technology platform where I'm honored to serve as Chief Strategy Officer for emergency aid. And he currently lives with his wife and 2 children in Baltimore and has some interesting prospects on his horizon, maybe he'll allude to today. In addition, I'm beyond delighted to welcome Soledad O'Brien, an award-winning journalist, speaker, author, philanthropist, mom, and dog mom, who anchors and produces the Hearst television political magazine program, Matter of Fact, with Soledad O'Brien. She is founder and CEO of Soledad O'Brien Productions, which also reports for HBO Real Sports, the PBS NewsHour, WebMD, and she has authored 2 books as well. She appears on a huge array of networks and has won many awards, including 3 Emmys, the George Peabody Award, an Alfred DuPont Prize, and the Gracie. Newsweek magazine named her one of the 15 people who make America great, and that includes great on Twitter. So I hope that you are following her. She also founded the Powerful Foundation that helps young women get to and through college. I had the incredible opportunity of working with Soledad O'Brien on a documentary called Hungry to Learn, which we've talked a lot about at the Hope Center because it follows the Real College movement and the lives of many students like Freddie who are fighting their way through the institutions of higher education and just trying to get a leg up. So they are bringing a wealth of expertise to today's conversation, and we will go ahead and get started. Okay, so we just learned about a lot of new data from the Real College Survey, and it shows that during the pandemic, unsurprisingly, rates of food and housing insecurity remain high. And it shows that despite the federal investment in things like the CARES Act, most students who need help are not getting the support that they need. Soledad, you had a chance to get an up-close look at this challenge when you were making Hungry to Learn. What do you think should be done at this point?
Yeah, it's kind of the $64,000 question, but I can highlight where I think some of the big gaps are that we were able to see in our reporting. In the process of doing the documentary, one of the things that you would see would be individual students, each kind of going at it alone as they tried to solve their own basic problem. Where can I get food from? How can I get enough to eat by the end of the day? How do I deal with a food plan that's very, very expensive and probably the costs are going to go up again next year, but it really only gives me one meal a day, maybe 2 meals a day, right? So all of these students individually kind of battling this problem, but as we're following them in the doc, they're handling it one on one, as opposed to just an overarching strategy for a problem, as your work has pointed out now for many years, exists in a major way and needs a bigger strategy around it. So every single student doesn't have to fight their way through the forest of how do I make this work while they're also working a job and while they're also trying to do well in their classes, that there's a shunt, a funnel, a way to support those students. We tell the story in our documentary that focuses on Real College of Izzy, who is just, it's interesting to watch her progress from a student who's hungry and trying to figure it out to a real activist when she realizes that she's not the only one. And in fact, in this documentary, each of these young people, at some point, it sort of dawns on them, and really around Real College, like, oh, it's not just me. There's a bunch of other people who are doing this as well. But I think because they fight it individually, it takes them quite a while to realize, like, the solution needs to be some big overarching strategy that shunts students who are struggling through a system that can help them, as opposed to each and every one trying to figure it out on their own.
And in the wake of that documentary, have you seen any responses or heard from colleges and universities that you feel are making those strides?
Yeah, what I think is interesting, one shift has been a movement away from bragging about your college pantry. At the same time we were shooting this doc, I was taking my daughters on college tours, and literally it's like, and over here we have the food pantry, and I think everyone's like, oh, that's so great. And it wasn't until we started reporting this doc that it made me realize, like, this is not a solution. And I'm glad people do it. I'm glad people donate. I think it's amazing and really and helpful. But, and the but is a big but, this is not a solution. And anyone who thinks that this is a solution is wrong. And they need to rethink the strategy. It really is a Band-Aid. It's something that needs a bigger solution. So yes, I think I have seen a shift in people bragging about the college pantry as, voila, we have a solution, to being like, this is what we're doing in the middle while we try to solve this problem. And I actually think that's a very big shift.
I think that's a terrific thing to note. I have been really impressed for many years with the work of a woman named Jan Poppendijk, who is a professor in the CUNY system. She wrote a book called Sweet Charity. And in that she talks, and this is well beyond college, right? She's talking about anti-hunger efforts in the United States over many, many, many decades. She talks about the seductive power of a food pantry, right? That it makes you feel like you're doing something, and you are. I mean, it is something that's on the shelf for a student on the day that they need it, but fundamentally it can be a distraction from the structural change. And I thought, during the pandemic, I just kept hearing more and more about, donate to your local food pantry. And I didn't hear as much about those larger changes until further along. And Wes, that's what I want to ask you about. One of the things that I was so honestly disheartened to see when the data started to come in was that just 18% of students dealing with basic needs insecurity were receiving SNAP benefits. So, this is a problem that the United States Government Accountability Office has called out. This is a problem that students have talked about for a long time. This is a problem that some on college campuses are aware of. What role do you think that state and federal leaders should play in helping connect college students to public benefits?
Well, and first, it is an absolute joy, as always, to be both with you and Soledad on these issues. And I just thank God that you continue to use your voices and your platforms to be able to address these issues that, as you all know, are not new, right? I mean, I think what we've seen from the impacts of COVID is that these things have been exacerbated, that we've watched an explosion of many of them. But the insecurity that we've been forcing our students to deal with are not new phenomena. And it goes back to this idea, and I love this point that Soledad makes when, one of the points we want to highlight to people is, why do you think that poverty exists? And I honestly ask this question to people, not as like, it's not a rhetorical tool. Like, I'm really asking them, why do you think poverty exists? And, well, there's a lack of opportunity and so on and so forth. It's like, you do understand that poverty exists because of policies, right? Period. Point blank. And so if we are going to be serious about this, it means we actually have to have scalable solutions to both understand why the problems exist in the first place, and then actual policies that are going to be able to address it. And so, when we talk about the fact that we do have, 18% of students dealing with basic needs insecurity are receiving SNAP. So it means we have to actually have a holistic approach in the way we're going to be dealing with that, right? So, we have to have the public sector, and they also must work to expand services like childcare centers across colleges and across these campuses, so that parents don't have to choose between taking care of their children and continuing their education. But it also must mean we must have actual legal changes that we know that Congress can make permanent, the recent expansion of SNAP eligibility for college students, and that the federal Department of Education also needs to work with the USDA and combine applications for SNAP and WIC with applications for Pell Grants and other forms of student aid. We know that there is a correlation between needs that students are facing, whether they are in or out of a classroom. So the fact that we repeatedly ask people to go through the same type of processes to be able to get to the same type of solutions is not just inefficient, it's offensive. It's offensive that we continue going through this process of forcing people who are living under this weight of poverty, students who are living under the weight of poverty, to continue to prove to me just how deep into poverty you are, right? State and federal governments can provide designated funding for higher education institutions, nonprofit groups to educate and to help enroll students in programs like SNAP and WIC. We know where the challenges exist. We know the pipeline challenges exist, but we actually have to have a concerted effort to be able to deal with it in actually a concerted fashion in a way that we have not historically done so.
Hey, Sarah, may I add something to
Go
that?
ahead.
And I also was going to say, and it might just be me, Wes is a little low on my end. So maybe, Wes, you could take a moment and up your volume while I add on, if I may, to what Wes is
Please.
saying. I think his point and about sort of this, and your point too, about sort of this idea of charity versus policy is so, I think we're moving away from that generally as well. I was talking to someone in philanthropy who was saying, people love doing the backpack giveaway, right? Because they like the photos with the kids and this, but the minute you start talking about, well, what if we didn't have to give away backpacks? What if everybody had a good job where they could buy their kid their own backpack? All of a sudden that conversation gets a little hinky, right? Like donors feel a little uncomfortable because now you're talking about how do you challenge issues around wealth and opportunity and home ownership and fair job, pay, et cetera, right? Those become policy challenges that are tougher, frankly. They're much tougher, and they don't always end with a cute picture of you with a kid with his new backpack before school starts. And so I do think this constant pushing people to think about policy versus let me show you our shiny new pantry and kids get to volunteer here and we're proud of it. on one hand, I would never ever want to diss somebody who is giving something. Like, it's important and I appreciate it, and they should know that is valuable. But there has to be a longer goal that everyone has in mind around making people self-sufficient and making systems work for people, students specifically. So in fact, they're not challenged on this front.
Yeah, I want to underline that our research findings at the Hope Center, particularly over the last couple of years, really do reach this conclusion. You know, in cases where a student has to travel to come pick up something free and just a bit of food, right, whatever's available, it doesn't seem to be as effective as when a student has the dignity of choice of going and shopping for their groceries nearer their home, right? And being able to do things without having to perform their poverty, quite literally, in order to get support. Wes, why don't we just check in and see if you want to add anything and how your sound is doing?
Yeah, no, speaking of systems,
it's great.
speaking of systems working, I think my microphone is back on. I apologize about that.
No problem. We heard you. I mean, and you had such a nice, loud and clear call for policy change. And you're speaking also, Wes, to administrative burden, which I want to suggest is not accidental. You know, I mean, this is highly racialized, the way that, you know, these systems are set up. My colleagues Pam Hurd and Don Moynihan, in their book, which is literally called Administrative Burden, the subtitle is Policymaking Through Other Means. I think it's a form of structural racism. You know, I don't know. Is that too strong?
Not at all. In fact, I'm going to be very honest. Not addressing it is the form of structural racism. I mean, we have to be honest about the fact that, you know, that the most predictive indicator that we have across life outcomes is race. And if we're going to be serious about addressing these issues, we have to be honest about that reality and to be able to disaggregate it. You know, if you know, when people say, well, you know, we try to be colorblind in the way that we assess our solutions, the problem is that the way these challenges have been created have not been colorblind. They've been amazingly intentional. And so when you look at the fact that even when we talk about college, right, where, you know, a statistical data fact is the fact that for a person with a college degree, that on average, they will have a lifetime earnings of around $1 million more than a person who does not. So we use that as an incentive, right? We use that data point as a way to continue to push forward this idea that we want more students to be able to not just get to, but through higher education. And we have to do that because we know, again, the data continues to reinforce the fact that it's the greatest trigger for economic mobility, sustainable economic mobility for individuals and families. But we also have to be honest about the disaggregation of the data. And the disaggregation of the data also shows us that right now in 2021, that a Black college graduate has the same earning potential, you know, payout as a white high school dropout. Now, you cannot look at that and say, but listen, it's not race, it's class. Of course it is. And the ability to be able to highlight that and look at that, I think, is going to be crucial in order for us to come up with the proper solutions. You know, we're also talking about institutions, if we're then just going to be very honest, we're talking about institutions that truthfully, when they were being created and when they were being built and when the infrastructure was being established, you, Sarah, you, Soledad, and me, we weren't intended. It wasn't for us. It was for other people. And so we cannot think that now, as we've watched this growing and this larger conversation about the fact that we want to create institutions that are actually creating pathways for all people who have an opportunity to not just attend, but to grow and to thrive. But we have not been thoughtful about what that means and how do we then truly address some of the targeted challenges that historically have exist. That's saying that and then wondering why we have data that shows disparities in performance and disparities in success matrix, like as if that stuff doesn't matter. And that it's just about the individual hard work. And if people just work harder, or they would try harder or sacrifice more, that somehow the results will be better. And so I think that one of the things that this data and this compounding of data continues to show, and that I think we have to be honest about, is that we cannot address economic mobility without also tackling systemic racism. And we can't just tackle systemic racism without addressing the lack of economic mobility. We have a collective responsibility to seize this opportunity and actually change the systems that we know weren't necessarily built for everybody,
but now we have a vested interest in making sure that they work for everybody.
I
And
also
that
like,
becomes our mission.
forgive me, Wes, I didn't mean to trip on
please,
you, but
please.
I like moving the conversation, Sarah, to systems. I think it's very easy in this day and age to talk about individuals. This person said this thing and this person, they're a racist, but actually much more powerful are systems that exist. And I mean, I remember when I started sort of looking into race and covering this as a reporter many years ago now, you know, if you talked about systemic racism, like literally your boss's eyes would roll to the back of their head. You know, no one wanted to discuss that. But I think the conversations currently are going that way when we talk about police brutality, when we talk about who has access to vaccines, right? When we talk about who has access to testing, when we talk about, well, who's really on the front lines in a pandemic, all those things are about systems that exist that are treating people unjustly and unfairly. And so I have really appreciated, and we have since then been asked to do multi-part series on systemic racism because people are trying to understand it, because understanding and wrapping your head around how a system operates is more complicated, but in a lot of ways, it's much more important, I think.
I agree. And I think that sometimes when we're focused on something like, you know, how do we just get more students to graduation, we narrow in and we forget how many systems are at work. So, you know, for example, you take a program like one that we're studying that helps students afford college by providing them with housing vouchers, right? Or you take a program that says we provide them with emergency aid. It's really easy to look at that program and falsely conclude that it is inclusive and racially equitable simply because you see more minoritized students using it, right? It should not be surprising that given the incredible labor market discrimination out there, and as Wes noted, the gaps in wages, for example, that we might see a large number of Black women using a program to support food or housing. But that doesn't mean that we know the program is inclusive. And one of the things that we did this year in the report that I'm so proud of and I hope people focus on is we compare their level of utilization of a program relative to their level of need. And you see the gaps, and the gaps are not surprising. In fact, Black men have the lowest rates of access to the very programs that we claim are serving diverse students. They're not nearly as good at serving those students as we would hope they are. And, you know, Wes, the system may not have been built for me, for women like me, but guess what? White women, we have rushed in and we have seized American higher education, and we're enjoying disproportionate access and power. And part of our job, I think, is figuring out how then we can share it and how we can increase access for everyone else. But that disaggregation of the data and the really close look is going to be essential if we want to change all of those structures. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate your call for that. Soledad, you know, you do a lot of work, and Wes, you do as well, around changing the narrative. Wes, you focused a lot on changing the narrative around poverty, and Soledad, you do this in many different regards. One of our most longstanding complaints is that when people picture a college student and when people talk about what a college student is like, they don't talk about Freddie, who we met earlier. You know, somebody who's married, somebody who's going to college with a pretty clear vision of what he wants to do, but a lot to also overcome. They frame him as if, you know, he doesn't need a stimulus check because he's got mom and dad to hang with. You know, that if he's going to go to the cafeteria and he can't afford to eat, it's just because he wants sushi and he's going to have to eat pizza. You know, we have all of these outdated modes and stereotypes and such. What are some of the things that members of the media can do to try to help us in this movement overcome this challenge?
Yeah, I would say members of the media and also people who tweet at and email at members of the media, right? So a couple of things. One, I think constantly reframing things for people about what the reality is very helpful. And certainly as a reporter, I always appreciated it when people would say, you know, 3 blocks from where you're doing that live shot, such and such is happening. I thought you might want to go and explore that because it's very valuable. And sometimes if you're somewhere on location, you don't necessarily know. And so I think it's actually fine to reach out to people and say, hey, I really liked the series that you did on this. One thing you might want to think about is such and such. Reporters are always looking for the next story and helping people and informing them. The average age of your college student, you might be surprised, is not 19. It's much older. And then that data point sort of reframes like, that's interesting. That kind of changes how I think about my story, number one. The second thing, what we've tried to do, I anchor a show on the weekends called Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien, and it's a syndicated show. But we sort of created a rule that we would not have non-experts on the air. Like we would never, ever have the dueling congressmen, yelling at each other over some topic, that people had to have a voice, and your expertise could be in your lived experience, or you could have your PhD in it or something. And I think that's really been helpful to constantly remind people, like, you can do that. You don't have to put, someone who's scoffing about college students and, I ate ramen when I was in college. Like that person might not really be worthy of expertise. There's a lot of people who you could talk to who might provide a lot of insight. And again, it's pushing people to do better and just think outside their own point of view and their own bubble. Most of the people who I worked with in journalism, at the time when I was in there were free internships, right? Which meant that you cut out a whole bunch of people. They were all students who were middle class, who were living on the couch of their aunts or their uncles or their moms and their dad, and living off the fat of the land because your internship was free. Well, guess then who goes into media in a big way? People who don't have oh my God, I really struggled through college, because those people can't do free internships. And even now they're still challenged around sometimes internships. So I think sort of challenging people around their point of view and the narrative that they think they're telling and how that matches to their own narrative that makes them comfortable, and giving them the voice of experts. And one of the things we did in that doc, right? Like here are the students themselves. They're amazing. I don't need to talk for them. They can talk for themselves. I think that has been very powerful.
And if I can say, I mean, and Soledad has a career of just being brilliant at this. Because
are we recording this, Sarah? Are we recording this?
No, because it's like, but it's like we can never forget about the humanity of what we're talking about. Oftentimes we can, and I know I live in just a sea of statistics, right? We all live in sea of statistics, and I really have more of a quantitative mind than a qualitative mind. Like I love the data. I love it. I also know that it is one of the fastest ways of missing the point of what we're actually talking about here. Where a person can throw out data and stats, and a person can throw out data and stats that could completely contradict each other. And the irony is they're both right? Because statistics is really just all it's about. It's about what outputs do your inputs give you, right? But the ability to be able to take people on a journey and remind people of what we're talking about. I had the pleasure of EPing a documentary about 4 years back called All the Difference, where we follow two kids from the South Side of Chicago and follow them on their journey into higher education. One went to a PWC, and the other one went to an HBCU down in Alabama, and we had a chance to just watch them through their 4-year journey. And to say, like, listen, we talk about things like housing insecurity and food insecurity, and we talk about the data around these issues, but it's also important, like, let's look at the path of Robert and Krishan. Let's look at the path of Freddie. Like, understand what and who we're talking about in all this. Because it is very easy for, whether it is a community organization or a lawmaker or whoever, to say, no, I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. It's much more challenging when you're asking them, when you're telling them, you're saying no to Freddie. You're saying no to Krishan. You're saying no to Robert. That becomes a much more complicated issue for not just a person to debate on, but frankly, a much more complicated argument for a person to win. And so our ability to add kind of this marriage of being data-driven and heart-led by being, both analytic and human is really a masterful combination for us to be able to get to the kind of answers and the results that we're actually all hoping to get to.
Oh, this is data-driven and heart-led. I love this. I want to say two things about that. So, this year when we put this electronic survey out into the field, there's an option for students to be able to add their own comments. It's my understanding from our research team that over 100,000 students did that. And their stories are reflected in the report. So you can hear their voices, and some of them are they're very hard to ignore. I mean, some of these folks thought about taking their own lives and decided they should, before they do that, or before they really get there, they should say something. And they're pleading in the survey data, asking for someone to do something. We clearly need to empower them and support them far more than they have been. This past year, we also inaugurated a student leadership advisory council. And I know how this normally goes. So I imagine what you might be thinking, it's the student body presidents from around the country. It's all the people the presidents love to hold up. We didn't go for those folks. We looked for the folks who make good trouble. We looked for the real college students, and we found them. And we found 23 of them. We actually found way more, but we could only take 23 of them. And several of them are from historically Black colleges and universities. And I think that's especially important because, as you noted, Wes, that is a place people go off to college and they talk about it with this acronym of HBCU, but they don't really know what it's like. And they don't recognize the heterogeneity that exists among historically Black colleges and universities. So, for example, we have one person who is at Paul Quinn College, a work college in Dallas. We have another who's at Spelman. Okay, these are very different kinds of places. And those student stories, I think, are going to be so important. And we're hoping that policymakers and others who are influential will take the time to meet with those students so they can learn from them. Next, I want to introduce Tyler Lum, who leads that Slack, who's going to pose a question to both of you.
Sarah, Soledad, and Wes, thank you for taking questions. My name is Tyler and I graduated from Temple University in 2020. And like many of my peers, I considered going to graduate school. Many of the issues we've learned about today are systemic, but there are clearly some colleges who do a better job at supporting their students than others. As a prospective student, what questions should I be asking of schools to ensure that they not only have the resources to support a student, but the culture to support a real college student? Equally as important, who should I be asking? Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Tyler, thank you so much. Wes, I'm going to turn that one to you first.
Tyler, that is such a good question. And thank you not just for asking, but thank you also for your journey in all this. There's a few different types of questions that I would urge you to ask. One, I would urge you to ask questions that's actually really digging into data that is most relevant to you. And it's things like, what are your retention, your graduation rates? But also I would get very specific, right? What are retention and graduation rates that you have for students that attended your high school? What are the retention and graduation rates that you have for students that are from your neighborhood? What are retention and graduation rates that you have for students that make up your background? Because it's one thing to ask a university what their retention and graduation rates, and they'll give you this big, beautiful, flowery number. But it gets always complicated when you ask them to actually break down the data. And first of all, it's important to know, do they even have it? And then, do they have it readily available, and are they willing to share it? And the answer is they should be. If they do not have it readily available, if they are not willing to share it, I can tell you that should be a major red flag that you should take note of. And I think the second thing that you should ask about is when going back to your specific situation, asking questions like, how many students leave the program with a full-time job offer? And what do you have a situation? What is it? How many students do you have that are working? What type of programs do you have to supporting and thinking about the families of students? Because this is, as a student goes into higher education, this is not just about them, but this is also about what does it mean for the entire family, and the journey of the entire family is going to be going on. And, one other question that I would also make sure you ask them is, are they willing to give you the names and contacts of other individuals? Are they willing to give you people who can serve as a guidance to you, as mentors to you, and not just necessarily people who they say, oh yes, we have a pairing program, but actually talking with people who can give you an honest analysis of what this journey is going to be like for you. If you have found an institution that's willing to check off all of those various things, then I think you not only found an institution that you can feel honestly understands you and your situation, but a place that you know that as you go through this journey and you have questions and complications, which every single one of us have, but that you are walking into a place that is ready to support you when those complications actually show themselves.
Wow, Wes, you just raised the bar for real college presidents all over the country. I think that's an amazing response. Soledad, I know you've actually, been through this. You've got your own kids, you ask questions, and, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I would only add, be very blunt. I think it's fine to say, everyone's selling you on a school. So use it. And they are all selling. The thing I've noticed that didn't exist when I was heading off to college, school is family. We looked at, my daughter was looking at Harvard, and I was like, this is not the video I got to see. The video I got to see was like, here's what's going to cost. But the video my daughter got to see, she didn't go to Harvard, by the way, was like, here at Harvard, it's a family, and these are your brothers and sisters, and your professors are basically, and I was like, really? This is so great, but this is what is being sold. So if someone's going to sell you, this is a family, then you get to say, okay, what's the strategy when someone in the family, what do you guys do when a student struggles? And I think that's a fair question to ask very bluntly of everybody, because what that's going to tell you, does the president say, well, actually, let me tell you, because you're going to get a chance to bump into the president at some kind of a reception or something or other. You can talk to other students because they'll be able to tell you probably in a more strategic way about what they've been through. You're going to be able to talk to the student success advisors. They're all called different things, but basically the guidance team, your own RAs, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually think it's a really good question to even ask of your professors, because if you're asking your professor, then they can answer. That means that it is something that has really seeped into the culture of the university. If your professors are like, honestly, I have no idea, you have a problem. It made me think about that young man who was in the middle of a coup and he was reaching out to his professor asking for extended time on the exam. You guys, I think it was York College or something in Canada. And how the professor's answer, right, was like, it was terrible. And he sort of said, you have to take the test or count more or something ridiculous. And how the entire what you can see, right, the entire university's culture has not really seeped down into everybody who's there. So it's a very fair question of every single person. If a student is struggling, what do they do? What are the steps? Who jumps in to be helpful? That will tell you the answer, or the lack of an answer will tell you a lot.
Oh, I very much agree. I think it should be possible for that faculty member to say, there's a statement on my syllabus that tells you where the resources are, right? This is the basic needs center. This is the website. This is how we connect students and support them. And I think this is
come
excellent.
To me if there's someone you want to talk to, because there's a great person. I can give you her email or his email, right? They should know. And if they don't know, that speaks volumes, I think.
Yeah, it does. We have all of these dollars right now, $63 billion in stimulus funds. And this is an opportunity for colleges and universities to actually lean into skilling up those professors and the staff so that they can have answers to those questions if they want to transform their institutions. So, a chance to get ready for that question from Tyler. There's one other question from a student who's also on the Student Leadership Advisory Council. This is a student in California named Michael, and let's see what he has to say.
Thank you all for having this event and for taking questions from us in the audience, including students. When looking at the higher education landscape, it's clear that many of the problems are caused by and can be solved by policy. However, there are a lot of problems that are cultural or practice-based that are unique to each institution that are also contributing to what we're seeing in the data. How might this be addressed on a wide scale, acknowledging that we can't legislate goodwill? And what advice would you give to students and possibly administrators and faculty trying to make a cultural difference at their campus? And what can external stakeholders also do to support this work?
It's such a tough question. Go ahead.
Can I ask for an example? I don't know if he has an example that he would want to talk about, because I think it might be very interesting. I can give an answer, and I think that he's absolutely right. You can't legislate goodwill. but there are different versions of what you can do to pressure, right? I always think these cultural practices often are very, they move along very quickly sometimes when there's a lot of pressure, especially pressure that can be challenging for an institution of higher learning. So, for example, boy, isn't suddenly everybody examining their slavery practices at the university. Isn't that interesting how that suddenly happened? Not because people of goodwill got together and thought it was about time, but because it suddenly became embarrassing for one institution and then another institution and another. And that, that has moved things along. Or certainly around sexual harassment, right? You see one institution and then everybody else says, you know what, we should check what we've been doing to make sure that we're not going to be named in something inappropriate or that's going to be embarrassing. So my quick answer would be all of those things often respond to a pressure, whether it's from students, whether it's from administrators, whether it's externally. I can't tell you the number of things that changed when I said, hey, I'm Soledad O'Brien. I'm looking into a story at your university. Who should I talk to? Suddenly everyone's like, oh, we need to address this. And I think that's good. I think that's a good way to think about how do you have conversations around culture that might need to be changed and also work to change those things that are cultural that need to be changed.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Let me give you a quick example that I know one of the students in the council brought to me. They said, we have an emergency aid program on our campus, but if you go to apply for it, and he said, I have a friend who was homeless and went to apply for this program. We were told that she couldn't get help because she hadn't first accepted all federal student loans. They told her that in order to get the $500 grant, she should first go accept all those loans that have been offered to her, which of course makes a whole set of assumptions about the role of loans. Are loans okay? Is an emergency the time to accept those loans, and so on? If you're confronted as a student with that kind of approach, which reflects certain cultural biases, Wes, do you have any additional advice for, do you literally call a reporter? I mean, what would you do?
No, but it actually helps me to think about the thing that can work to create change, and not just individual change, but it is about the structural change as well. Right? Because I think we also don't want, when we talk about the challenges that an individual student faces, and I think that one's actually a great one, Sarah, where you can make an assumption for every student who's going through a challenge in that institution for higher education. You're not the only one. Right? Just go ahead and make that assumption that the challenges you are facing when it comes to being able to gain access to basic aid that you rightfully deserve, the fact that you are dealing with a housing or a food insecurity issue, the fact that you are having difficulty registering for classes, or the fact that student body is not necessarily set up for a working parent, or whatever the case might be. Here's a guarantee. You're not the only one who's dealing with that issue. And so I think that there are some fundamental things that have to be done. One is, it is important for you to be able to make your voice heard, to be able to address that issue. The truth is that institutions move on the things that they continue to get demands to move on. Right? So on your individual case, if you continue to push up the fact that you're having this issue and you think this issue can and should be resolved, people will move on things that they continue hearing about. It is just human nature. You should also find people who are dealing with those very same issues. When you know, and having that ability to be able to talk with people, being able to build a coalition around a specific set of issues is the fastest way of getting things to be able to move on a larger basis, because people move when they know that there's a collection and there's a cohort of people who are dealing with the same things. Because, and that goes to the third point, is that is how you address the social and the structural changes that then have to exist. Because if people can dismiss an individual complaint as an individual complaint, impossible to do that when you have a chorus. Impossible to think that it's just an individual complaint when you have a collection of people who are dealing with the exact same issues and the exact same challenges. And I think it goes back to Soledad's point earlier, where it's like, it's some of these things aren't, I understand that some things you might feel that are individual, not necessarily policy. The reality is the reason that you have individual pain is because you have a policy that is allowing the individual pain to exist. And it goes back to, a quote from Dr. King, which I love, where he says, he said, policies don't change the heart, but policies will protect me from the heartless. And this is how we then go about changing policies that actually do a better job of protecting the individual circumstances that a student is facing. But it is very important for them to understand you are not alone in that challenge. Your ability to be able to lift up your and the voices of other people in that is the fastest way to actually promote the kind of systemic and structural change that's going to be necessary.
And Sarah, I think the answer is yes. I mean, you don't call the New York Times, but certainly your school probably has a newspaper, and that would be a very interesting story. I guarantee you, a student trying to figure out emergency housing who's homeless is turned away. That's on the front page, let me tell you.
Good advice. Well, finding the others in the chorus can be hard for many different groups of students. And one of those groups are students who are parenting while in college. We know there are very substantial numbers of folks out there, probably more than the official data tell us, because they're narrowly capturing only those who, for example, are raising their own children. A lot of people right now are raising other people's children. One of our board members at the Hope Center, Nicole Lynn Lewis, has an incredible book coming out. I think, Soledad, you're also aware of this great book, Pregnant Girl. And, you know, she makes the point that it is so profoundly isolating to be a student on a campus who, honestly, a lot of people think isn't supposed to be there. You know, she was a teen mom and she goes off to William and Mary and says, this place was not built for me, to your earlier point, Wes. I've had many college students at Temple University who are raising kids, including during the pandemic, and have said to me in a confiding sort of way, you know, I have a kid. And I want to be like, yeah, and so do 5 others of these people in your class, but you don't even know that. You know, under those circumstances, how do you suggest that people mobilize? And I also want to ask you, what should those parenting students be fighting for, particularly for their kids right now? It's up for grabs. Who wants to go first?
Well, maybe I'll start, Wes, then you can jump in. First of all, let's all just start with parenting is completely hellacious 99% of the time when the baby's little, and then as they grow, it gets a little bit easier, but it's just hard. And so I think what the students need to do, as you sort of point out there, Sarah, is come together. Because as Wes was talking about, you have much more strength when we have a number of parents on campus and we need to figure out how to assist them versus I've got this one whiny person who keeps coming to me asking for something special to be done for them. That's going to be much less effective. So I would say any way in which you can bring students together under whatever, you know, if it is parenting, you know, okay, great. Here's parents, you need to come together. The great news about everybody being socially distant is that we now have figured out ways to be together without actually having to drive across town and physically sit together, which of course, if you're a parent, that often is very impossible to do. When someone suggests a meeting, you know, your head pops off your body. If you have little ones, it's just really hard to manage. So now, great. You can be doing Zoom meetings that are very effective and very efficient and can have a lot of productivity come out of them without having to leave your living room or your bedroom. And so I would say, 1, get all the parents together. Figure out like what is the group that can just be a parenting group. 2, figure out how do they meet in some capacity. And then what they should ask for is, well, what do you need? Because I think every single group needs something else. You know, are you a rural school? Are you an urban school? That's going to be a big differentiator in what exactly you require and you want to ask for. And then I would say you do need an advisor from the school. You need somebody who's going to be your conduit with the university or the college who can sort of say, I can take your complaints, your issues, your questions, the information you need, and I can be that person who goes back and forth. But I think the first step is coming together. And that nowadays is not so hard.
Good point. Les, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say I think about the role, and this goes back to, you know, I hate to sound like we're broken record, but the role of policy in all of this. And the reason that it's important that we have a real coordination and consolidation around this, particularly for our institutions of higher education. You know, people talk about the most recent act, the American Relief Plan, and what it meant for higher education. And I actually think, arguably, one of the most important parts of the ARP for higher education was one that higher education does not speak about often, but actually I think probably is going to end up having a longer term impact on the student body population that we're speaking about than almost anything else that was included inside that plan. And that was the adjustment to the child tax credit, right? Where we have a child tax credit that was put in place that was, again, put in place that to establish a way of supporting families that were living in poverty, to provide some type of capital to individuals who have children, right? And it was paid on an annual basis and a relatively meager amount. But one thing we knew with that was about 27 million children were being left out every year. And they were being left out because they were too deep into poverty, because the child tax credit before had an earn-in that you had to be able to have in order to qualify for a child tax credit, right? So again, a poverty fighting program that was leaving 27 million out because they were too deep into poverty. Do you know who part of that population represents? Our students, because they were the parents of these children. Parents who were trying to navigate their way and their space into higher education and fulfill a promise that we were making to them about how higher education was going to propel them and their families to a better life. But because of an earn-in, we were telling them they didn't qualify, right? So now, with this adjustment that was made within the CTC, we not only increased the amounts, and now for children under the age of 6, it's now $3,600. And for children over the age of 6, it's now $3,000. But there was a really important change that was made that we had been pushing for over 8 months. And that push was to make it refundable. By doing that, we have almost essentially cut child poverty in half. Literally overnight. And it goes back to this idea when people say poverty is a choice. I'm like, it is a choice. But it's not the choice of the individuals living under poverty. It's society's choice about how much poverty they're willing to tolerate and how much pain we're willing to tolerate in our neighbors. Now this goes back to the policy. So this was a major, major win. And actually, I think for the population that we're talking about, Sarah, this actually might be the most important caveat in the entire ARP that nobody talks about and how that's going to support this population. However, what's important to note, and particularly for people who are watching this right now, it's for a year. If it does not get extended, and in my opinion, if it does not be made permanent, we will watch these families drop right back into poverty. And so it becomes our obligation to be involved in this work. It becomes our obligation to be involved in this fight. And frankly, for the institutions of higher education, it behooves you to be advocates and to coordinate and to lobby together as a group, to lobby together as a base, and make it heard that you want this plan made permanent when at the end of this year, when, as is stated in the current ARP, when it's supposed to come to an end. That could be one of the most powerful things, one of the most powerful collaborations that our institutions of higher education could have, that is going to directly impact a significant portion of their population and give them a better prospect to not just get into school, but to actually complete.
Thank you for laying that out so clearly and for the call to action. I think about the fact that the numbers of students in college right now who this would affect are substantial, but they could even be more substantial, right? There are 34 million people who had some college, no degree before the pandemic, before all these people stopped out. And those folks could be college students again. They could enroll at these institutions if we would make their economic lives and their lives as parents a bit easier. And that's a win-win. Honestly, that's a win for the private sector, for employers, and it's a win for colleges, and it's a win for these families and these children. So I know how much my own students, when I told them that this time they're in the stimulus checks, right? And this time they're getting emergency aid, that they were excited. But when I told them about the child tax credit, they were saying, is this real? This is amazing. So you're right. We have an obligation to fight to continue it. We have just a couple of minutes left. And in the last couple of minutes that we have, I want to ask you to continue in this thread around structural change. Okay. There are governors out there, current and future. There are people like the Biden administration who just today came out and said they want to invest $12 billion in the nation's community colleges. These are people who our government affairs offices at our institutions could be making asks of. These are people that our journalists have an opportunity to ask hard questions of. These are people that our students and those who work at institutions can be writing to. What are the asks? What are the questions? What are the demands, whether state or federal, wherever you want to focus? Where do you think we should be headed? Soledad, would you like to start? You're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key is in understanding the answer that you want, right? Which is what exactly in your ask, the whole point of asking a good question is that you're trying to get very narrow and very specific. So I think whether it's state or it's federal, it is all around what specifically are you going to do for this particular community? And by the way, I love telling people ahead of time what I'm going to ask them, right? Because you want them to be prepared. You don't want a filibuster kind of conversation where they're filling the time. You want them to literally say, this specifically is what we're going to do. And again, I think the ask is going to depend on really what you need in your community. Stories that we have worked on, certain people need gas cards, right? Because they're all students who are driving, and that is actually going to really help alleviate a major, major problem. Well, in New York City, handing out gas cards, probably not that helpful. Most of the students are taking public transportation, right? So they swapped out in this one particular program, gas cards for the rural kids, metro cards for the kids who are in urban environments. And so I think it's all around really specific asks around the communities that you're trying to make change for. But it's holding people accountable. And when you ask these broad questions, it's not so helpful because people can dodge, right? So I'd say whatever the answer you're trying to get to, then you deconstruct your question to make sure that you're sending someone through a funnel to get a specific answer and a lot of clarity.
Sorry, that's good advice in general. Yes, Wes, go ahead.
Absolutely. And first I say here, to exactly be very clear about what you're looking for. And I think, one of the things I hope people remember is, what some of the true collateral damage of this last pandemic showed us. And that's the fragility of jobs and the fragility and the unavailability of good jobs. As people are going through this process of higher education, you're doing it with a hope of a pathway to put yourself on a sustainable economic platform for you and your family, so that individual or singular shocks don't end up turning your family and frankly generations future of your family into a bit of a tailspin. We saw how a virus eliminated 11 years of job growth in 11 weeks, gone. And we saw how it was our populations that really took the hardest hit when it came to that, and had been the most complicated to find employment and jobs, to have them return. And so I think as people are thinking about what are the things that we want to focus on, it is about how are we providing and how are we both educating for, how are we preparing for, how are we reskilling for, and how are we mandating for good jobs, sustainable platforms, so people do not have to feel so unbelievably insecure. Even for people who've managed their way to work through the higher education paradigm. 24% of people who lost their job due to COVID-19 were people who were living in poverty before COVID-19, i.e. it was the working poor. The people who were working jobs, in some cases multiple jobs, and still living below the poverty line. There's a fundamental unfairness about that. And so I think as we're talking about the things that we want to push for and advocate for and lobby for, it has got to be, don't continue making false promises to us. Come up with frameworks and ways that are saying if we're willing to put in the work, then there is something on the other side that's going to give us a better chance and a better opportunity. But as of right now, and that was part of the thing that COVID continued to show us, is that is not a truism in all communities. And that's how we should be pushing for that when it comes to the long-term build that we're hoping for.
Oh, well, it's tremendous. I really appreciate the extent to which you are both telling the truth in your daily work, that you are calling out those who are not telling the truth about what's really happening in communities. Wes, I know when you think about a job, you think about more than money. You think about a stable home. You think about access to healthcare so that people can avoid getting sick.
That's right.
You know, all of these things are affecting students' educational opportunities, and they need so many out there every day fighting for them. And I'm just so grateful that you're in the corner of Real College students and in the corner of the Hope Center. And when we've really, really needed you to lift up this platform. Warren Bader Harris, my dog, just joined us, by the way, Soledad. I'm sure you've got Coco there with you, and Wes, I know you've got a lot going on. So I want to just, express my gratitude for all the time that you took today, and for all of the inspiration that you provide as in our fight for structural change. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Deirdre Hopkins, our amazing Director of Communications at the Hope Center, to close us out.
Well, thank you, Sarah. On behalf of all of the teams at the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice, our research, our institutional transformation, our sustainability, our policy and advocacy, and my comms team, I want to thank our panelists and our students who brought amazing perspectives and intriguing questions today. And thank you, our viewers, for attending this kickoff event to the Real College virtual journey. Be sure to sign up for your path to this virtual journey if you haven't already. Head right now to our website, hopeforcollege.com, click on the virtual journey. You'll see a URL, you can click there and sign up. The next Real College virtual journey events will happen next Wednesday, 1 week from today, April 7th. You'll be able to choose between two paths, either path 2, bridging the gap, effectively connecting students to basic needs supports, or path 3, fighting for change, advancing a federal agenda for real college students. If you find it's hard to choose one of those paths, don't worry. You'll have access to this program and all of our program all year long once you sign up. Registration is open now, so please make your way over to hopeforcollege.com and sign up for the virtual journey. This video will now replay on this site, so please feel free to share the link with your community, your real college community, and I hope that we'll see all of you back on April 7th. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy your evening.